Welcome to the Feria TechCast, where we bring you all things science, engineering, technology, and innovation. I'm your host, Ezekiel Etheria, and today we are joined by Alicia Navarro, a serial tech entrepreneur who built Skimlinks from her living room into a $50 million global business. Then, during the first COVID lockdown, she started Flon, a platform built around a simple idea. Sometimes we focus better when someone else is in the room, even virtually. It's called body doubling, and it's become a lifeline for remote workers, students, and especially people with ADHD who struggle with distraction when working alone. Alicia, I am super excited to welcome you to the show. Thank you very much for taking the time to join us here today.
My pleasure. Nice to meet you and be here with you today, Ezekiel.
All right, it's a pleasure to welcome you. Let's get things started, Alicia. You built Skimlinks from your living room in Sydney into a $50 million global business before its acquisition in 2020. Then during the first COVID lockdown, you started Flon. What was it about that moment being at home, the world shutting down that made you want to build something around focus and connection?
So the idea for Flown had been brewing for probably a year beforehand. So after although Skimlinks got acquired in 2020, I had actually stepped down from running the company day to day 2 years before that. And so I took essentially a 2-year sabbatical where I very deliberately spent 2 years trying lots of different things, reading different books, going on different sort of expeditions to try to work out what mission I wanted to take up next. And in that time, I read lots of books and explored lots of ideas. And the book I read that really inspired me the most during that time was this book called Deep Work by Newport.
Mm,
You may have heard about it, but it's an excellent book that explores the concept of deep work, which is work that you do in a state of focused concentration. And it's the kind of work that you do that really moves the needle, writing something important, thinking through a difficult problem, creating something artisanal or creative. And it's not only the importance of the work that happens in that state, but when you get opportunities to work in that way, you also feel great about yourself and about your contribution in the world. So it's a really critical way of working for people because the opposite is shallow work. And if you spend all your days just doing meetings and answering emails, you can often finish your day feeling a bit empty, a bit like your day hasn't really mattered. And it's very closely linked to the idea of flow and flow states. So reading that, I just became really inspired and very much recognized that our eroded ability to focus in this world of constant notifications and social media distractions is one of the most critical challenges that we face as humans. Because if we can't focus, how on earth are we going to fix all the other big problems that we have to face as humans? So I decided that that's the mission I wanted to take up next. I wanted to build a platform that can scale the delivery of focus and flow states to people wherever they are in the world. And so I started playing with what that platform might look like. And the initial version of Flown was quite different. It was more of a marketplace for physical spaces that you could book to get away from your day to day in order to do deep work. And I decided to launch that and was preparing the deck and raising money from investors at exactly the moment that COVID hit. So it was more a coincidence that I was starting Flown
mm,
during COVID. But when I saw what the impact of COVID was going to be on how we worked and where we worked, it became even more important to me that I go ahead with Flown. And so we did, and we went ahead with it. And then about 6 months after launching, we realized that we were trying to do too much. We had launched the marketplace for physical spaces, but because I wanted Flown to be really accessible and really impactful to as many people as possible, we had also launched this more accessible and cheaper solution, which was virtual spaces that you could work from, these focus sessions that we were running. And so I basically realized that we were doing too much at once and made the decision to stop working on the physical spaces side of the business and just double down on the focus sessions that we were running, because that was going to be a lot more scalable and I think a lot more impactful to more people. And so that's how Flown in its current state was born.
All right. Thank you very much for sharing that. The start of that journey for you. So you talk about body doubling, working silently alongside someone else for accountability. So why does that work? And what's the science behind why having another person in the room, even if it's virtual, can help us focus?
Yeah, it's a really interesting concept because it works on many different levels. So the first is just part of how our brains work as humans. So humans are programmed to mimic each other. It's called social mimicry, and it's based on our brain makeup is such that we subconsciously mirror the behaviors that we observe. And that's necessary because that's how we learn empathy. That's how we learn how to do things. It's how we learn to connect with people. And so when you see other people focusing, you subconsciously mirror those behaviors and start to also find it easier to focus yourself. It's why going to a library to study was so effective for people when they were in college, for example. It's why we yawn when we see other people yawn, etc. So there's sort of the biological side of it. Then there's just the pure motivation. Like when you see other people at their desk working, you feel motivated. You feel, wow, if they can do it, I can do it too. So there's sort of an emotional, psychological level there. Then there's also what's called implementation intention. So if you say to someone, I'm going to do this thing by this date, you just increase the likelihood that you will get that thing done by a significant amount, as opposed to not saying what you're going to do. So stating your intentions make it more likely that you achieve those intentions. Then there's the time boxing element. So time boxing is when you schedule in a piece of work and you put it into your diary, because all too often when we work, we find it easier to do the shallow work, answer that email, do that meeting. And if you do it that way, you'll find your days filled with all this shallow work and you haven't scheduled the time to do the deep work. So if you invert that and you schedule in, you time box a piece of work and you say, this is when I'm going to do this thing, you're much more likely to show up. You're much more likely to do it. And then there's the group accountability. So it's the same reason that people get gym partners or go to the gym with a gym instructor to work. It's just, you feel a lot more motivated and compelled to show up when there's other people that rely on you to attend. So all these different micro triggers compound to create this really powerful effect of increasing your ability to focus when you're in a body doubling session. As a result of your focus, you're able to get a lot more done. So your productivity increases. And because you get that work done in a really compact amount of time, you feel amazing at the end of it. So you get the dopamine hits, which makes you want to do it again and again. And so it becomes a habit. So that's why body doubling is such an effective method for people, particularly with ADHD, but anyone really that's struggling with focus and procrastination to overcome those challenges and get a lot more done than they even thought possible. Yeah, it's wild, I know.
All right, Alicia, you've said that ADHD friendly focus support is becoming more relevant as remote work becomes normal. So why is that? What happens when someone with ADHD tries to work from home without the structure of an office?
Yeah, so and it was really interesting that as a result of COVID, there was a significant increase in the number of people seeking diagnosis and really discovering that they were struggling where they might not have realized that they were struggling in the past. And that's because before, when we were all going to an office to work, we were basically body doubling by going to the office. You were time boxing your work because you were accountable to go to an office at a particular time. You were accountable to your boss. You had a structure. You showed up, you sat at your desk, there were people around you, so you benefited from the mirror neurons in your brain, causing you to focus and mimic the behaviors that you saw of people around you. You felt accountable, you felt, you were very clear with what your day's structure was going to be. And so going to an office masked for many people the fact that they may have had ADHD or similar challenges. Suddenly it's COVID, we're all working from home, and we all lose what I call the scaffolding that used to our working day. So suddenly you had, no structure, no one to make you feel accountable, no one to body double with and mimic the behaviors of. And so for a lot of people, they just really were not capable of feeling focused, getting started on a task, able to stay on task. It just became a really big problem. And so for a lot of people, they realized that they had a challenge. And that's why, ADHD diagnosis rates have skyrocketed in the last few years as people realized that without the scaffolding of going to an office, they really struggled with basic executive function abilities.
Okay. Okay. So, you talk about designing conditions for deep work instead of actually demanding productivity. So what's the difference? How does a leader shift from that get more done mindset to actually creating an environment where focus can happen?
It's a really good question. So and I have to sort of break this down into companies that ask their employees to go into an office and versus companies that are mostly remote or hybrid. So if you go into an office, to a degree, you have a lot of people, you do have the body doubling effect because you're sitting in an office, usually open plan, where you benefit from being around others. The challenge, however, is that it can be distracting. So you may be in an office, there may be people around you, but they're not quiet, they're not focused. Like in a library, they're going to be walking around, they're going to be talking. And so it's very, very distracting, and you don't get the full benefits of body doubling in going to an office. So for those kinds of companies, the recommendation is that you have different areas of the organization, different physical areas that have different roles. So if you're going to be, you can have an open sitting area where you're just doing your shallow work. An open plan office is great for shallow work, but you probably want to have a section of your office that's for focused deep work. And that's where people go. It's quiet. You perhaps have a cubicle around you, so there's no distractions. And once you're in there, you know that that's a focused area, and you go in with that very specific intention. So that kind of stuff can really help. For remote or hybrid companies, what you probably want to do is create boundaries within the working week that ring fence focus time. So what a lot of companies do is have a day or a portion of a day that has no meetings in it. And the more that is sort of really encouraged and baked into the culture, the better. And that often means that it's the leaders that have to be the first in demonstrating the sanctity of that time, and not pinging people on Slack during what's meant to be a no meeting or no distraction section of the working week. That can really help. And then providing the tools and workplace adjustments, not just to those that have physical or mental challenges like ADHD or autism, but really anyone in the office that might benefit from tools like Flown, which is a body doubling platform, because all these tools, while particularly optimized for people with ADHD, can benefit anyone that is human and struggling with focus at the moment in society.
All right, Alicia. So you have also trained as an executive coach. So does that coaching mindset show up in how you lead Flon? What do you do differently as a CEO because of that training?
So a big philosophy of mine, I really love to spot talent within individuals and give those people opportunities to exercise their talents on a regular basis, even if it's not necessarily their job. And over the years, I think what I've been very good at is spotting latent talent and helping people lean into that and reach heights that they didn't even know existed. So, for example, at Skimlings, my last company, I really loved hiring people in account management and sales roles that had never done that job before. You know, a lot of people hire people for those roles that are very aggressive and gung ho. I really like to hire people that were great at building relationships. Um, I taught them how to sell, but people that, you know, it's much harder to have, you know, to have people to learn charisma. So I hired people that had great charisma and were really great at forming relationships, and I taught them sales, and I gave them opportunities again and again and again to lean into their particular strengths. So I remember I had someone that joined us that had never done sales or account management before. And after a few years, he had been promoted so many times that I sent him to New York, and he was running all of North America sales and our entire North American office single-handedly. And then now in Flown, one of my early hires had never had an office job before, had no experience working in an office. He had been a yoga teacher and like a stage hand, like a technical stage hand. But I saw something in him. He had a sparkle in his eye. He was very coachable. He had a lot of charisma, and he had really good instincts around creating live events, which is what we wanted to do at the time. And again, as I worked alongside him, I saw how coachable he was, how much natural instincts he had around leadership and management. So I just gave him more and more opportunities to lean into that skill that he had. And now, because I've been on maternity leave, he was the person I chose to take over to run the company in my absence. So, you know, I think what I've learned is when you give people opportunities to lean into their strengths, they can do really extraordinary things that even they didn't know that they were capable of.
Okay. So here's one I'm curious about. So you normally spell Flon in capital letters. So why is that?
Good question. Do you know, I think it looks nice. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought as
Because
much. I just wanted to confirm.
I'm mindful that it's a normal word, I wanted to differentiate it from it being a normal word. And I think there was something really beautiful about the letters when they were done in
Hmm.
capital. So there's no reason. It just is an aesthetic decision. Do you
All
like
right.
it?
Yeah, I do. I do like it. I thought as much. Because it looked good when I saw it in capital letters, and I was like, okay, maybe that could be the reason. Well,
Yeah, that's
I was curious, too curious, and I had to confirm.
you know, no one's ever asked me that before. You know, I've been asked many questions over the years, but that's the first time someone's asked me that. So thank you.
All right, you're welcome. Alicia, you worked in startups your whole career. What's something you believed about productivity and focus that you've completely changed your mind on? What did experience teach you?
I I think the one that's coming to mind is around having to be in an office to be productive. So at Skimlinks, we were very much an in-office company. And that's because the culture that we had, which I was very deliberate and intentional about designing, embedding, and nurturing, was very much a in-office culture. So the values that we really optimized for when we were hiring people was, you know, people that were charismatic and wanted to have fun, like were very sociable, because I wanted to create a really social environment that encourage people to come to the office, to make friends with other people, and therefore remain loyal and hardworking because they had formed these social relationships in the company. That was a very deliberate choice. And so I very much resisted hiring people to work remotely because I didn't want there to be inconsistencies in our culture. And so when I started Flown, again, I was very deliberate about how I wanted the culture to be. And I made the decision this time that it was going to be a remote first company, but that would mean a different set of values and behaviors that we optimized for in our culture. And what I've been really proud to see is that it is, and I guess this is the learning, that, you know, you can still have a very high performance and really cohesive culture, even when working remotely, but it just takes an entirely different style of leadership, an entirely different culture. And it takes just, I'd say, even more work to make successful than an in-office culture.
All right. So, for a remote worker listening right now who's struggling with distraction and loneliness. So, what's the first small thing they could try today before joining Flon or buying anything, and just to get a taste of what body doubling can do?
Yeah, well, I mean, obviously, the first thing I'd say is sign up and do our 30-day free trial. We offer the longest free trial in the world for body doubling, and there's no credit card. You're not, you don't have to put anything in. You sign up with an email address and you have 30 days. And even after that, if you don't want to pay, there's a free option as well. So we really wanted to make body doubling accessible to anyone. And so we've worked hard to make sure that there's, a generous free option and an always forever option as well. However, what we also really encourage people to think about is in the same reason that, people think about a gym membership as something that you pay for so that you feel an incentive to show up and go to the gym. Wow, I've paid for it, so I have to show up, And so that's the kind of same mechanism that's at work with Flown. You pay, and it's not a lot. It's like £180 a year, which is what, at the cost of one coaching session. And that gives you unlimited focus sessions, but that sort of mental incentive to show up and work in a focused way as often as you can because you've made that small financial investment into your ability to focus.
All right, all right. So, part of the theme of this podcast, Alicia, is centered around the word innovation, and for that reason, we like to cycle around that topic. Discuss a few, get some few insights on that for every conversation we have on this podcast. So, after building two companies, one in monetization and one in focus, so what does true innovation in work and productivity mean to you now?
That's a good question. I mean, I think innovation as a general concept to me is approaching a problem as if you were, coming at it from a completely different direction. For me, I would often get really innovative when I would deliberately step away, like if I was going for a walk in a forest or, going to a concert or just going into an environment that was completely different from what I was trying to work on. Or if I went, for instance, to a conference, I would often go to listen to talks that were in a completely different space to what I was in. And then I would try to associate something from that talk or from the forest or just wait until an unrelated thought would come in. And I would often find that my best ideas that would spark real innovation would be by saying, well, what if I associated this random thing to the problem I'm trying to solve? Because I think a lot of the time when you're in a problem, you're approaching it the same way that everyone else is. And I think that sometimes if you look at how would I solve this problem if I was in a different industry, if I was a different person, or if I was a child, it could often unveil insights or directions that would be completely nonsensical to anyone within the industry itself that you were trying to address. So when it comes to things like focus and productivity, I think, what we looked at was rather than, I think a lot of the other productivity and focus related solutions out there were very content based. It's here's this app, watch this video, learn this thing. And what we try to do is say, well, what if you bring in, I was really inspired by, for instance, what Peloton did. So Peloton, for those who don't know, is the exercise company where you're riding a bike at home, but you're watching on a screen an instructor and you're riding at the same time as other people from all over the world that are connecting virtually into this exercise class. So I was really inspired by how they created brands around their instructors. So I said, well, what if we did that, but with how we work? So I hired really charismatic facilitators to run focus sessions as if they were gym instructors or Peloton instructors. And that was an example of how I brought, innovation into a space that usually was just asynchronous passive content.
So yeah, Alicia, that was a really fantastic view on innovation and what it means in work and productivity. So lastly, for our listeners who actually want to try Flon for themselves or just learn more about your approach to focus, where is the best place for them to start?
Just head over to flown.com, FLOWN, and there you can sign up for the 30 days of body doubling for free. And you can read a lot more resources around how body doubling can help those with ADHD or freelancers or PhD students and many other professions and types of people. I'm also on LinkedIn as Alicia Navarro, where I post a lot of content on the subject as well.
Great. So, Alicia, it has been such an insightful conversation with you here today. Yeah, I really appreciate you joining us on the show. Thank you very much.
My pleasure. Thank you so much for having me.